Hi, this is Josh Kroll. We're going to get started in just a second. We're going to make sure everybody can get in for this, but I will be going right away. I know life's are can be a little crazy. If you do get pulled away, this session is being recorded, so you will be able to review it later. But then you have to reach out to me and directly seek help versus asking for help during the session, the webinar today. So we got a really good group here. We're going to be uh, using the Q&A to ask questions. I'll be spending a lot of time just talking to you, and then Becky will be responding to questions. She's excellent too. She's knows almost as much as I do about the adoption tax credit, and has been doing this for quite a long time also. But we'll break it a few points and she'll ask me some questions that she thinks everybody should hear. So, looks like, oh wow, we are 146 right now. That's awesome. And still a couple coming in. So, get started in just a second or two. Oh, someone said they can't hear me. Becky, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Josh.
Okay. So, Julie, maybe try your speaker or audio settings. So, okay, other people are hearing me just fine. Hey, Joni, nice to see you there. Um, all right, we're going to get started. It looks like we've capped off here. So, today, my name is Josh Kroll. I am the Adoption Subsidy Resource Center Program Manager. Um, and today we're going to focus on the 2025 federal adoption tax credit, but we're going to cover so if you adopted in prior years and didn't take it. We're going to cover claiming children as dependents for the child tax credit. That's going to be at the very end. This will cover all types of adoption. It doesn't cover step parent adoption, but it covers private domestic adoptions from foster care. I spend a fair bit on that, and international adoptions. And I have been helping people with this since the 2003 tax season. So 2024 is when I first started helping people. So I'm in my 23rd tax season of helping people. I am not a tax preparer or expert, but I'm pretty good with math. And just like when I do the adoption subsidy work, everything I know I've learned on the job, and they're pretty specialized areas. So I know it very, very well. So, and that's why you're here today. Um, so let's get going here. And just a little bit, like I said, welcome to the Federal Adoption Tax Credit. A little bit about Families Rising. We were founded by adoptive parents in '74, and we work to ensure all children in foster care have permanent, loving families, and families and adoptive foster and kinship families have the support they need. Our key mission is to support adoptive, foster, and kinship parents and young people, educate child welfare professionals and parents, as we're talking today, and advocate that children have families have support. So, today I'm going to cover the basic information about adoption tax credit. I'm going to then spend a little time on how the credits work, and then I'm going to finish with claiming children as dependents. Um, so let's get started. Um, so, for the adoption tax credit, to be eligible to claim the adoption tax credit, you have to adopt the child. And I know that sounds crazy because it's like part of the name, but I've had people ask, rightfully so, is this also work for subsidized guardianship? As foster care, as state agencies look more and more to guardianship, we don't have a guardianship credit. This is for adoption. There is some effort out there to try and have a foster care tax credit. That hasn't been introduced, I don't think, anywhere yet. And that would help people who do more like emergency, don't have a kid for the full year that they can claim as a foster child. That doesn't exist yet. This adoption credit does, and it's been around since the 90s. The child, oh, and the adopting a child, it can't be your spouse's child, a stepchild. Any other type of adoption, private domestic, international, from foster care, they can be eligible for this, just not adopting your spouse's child. The child must be under 18 years old at the time of adoption or completely and totally disabled. you have to have modified adjusted income below a certain income level, and either the child has been determined by the state to be special needs, or you have to have qualified adoption expenses. Children determined to be special needs qualify for the maximum tax credit even if they didn't pay anything in expenses for the adoption. So this is the years we're considering today. The far left column, this is the adoption tax credit since 2002, maybe it was 2001, has had a cost of living adjustment. And it started at 10,000 and it's gone up over the years. And you can see some years it went up a lot more than other years. And so what you're looking at here is the year you're claiming the credit is the far left column. The next column is the maximum amount of credit per child that is available in that year. The next one, and I haven't seen yet the publication where the Magi got adjusted up to. It will be higher, but not a lot higher than the 2025 amounts. The next column, the third column, is the lower Magi amount. As long as your income in the year you're claiming the credit is below that, your modified adjusted gross income is below that, you qualify for the full amount of the credit you're taking, whether it's special needs and you're claiming the full amount, or you have expenses and you're claiming up to the full amount. That is, you'll have access to that. If you're over 259,190 in 2025, but you're less than 299,190, you'll get a portion of it. And that range is always, that phase out range is always 40,000, and has been since the credit originally was created. You can get a portion of it. So if I'm halfway in there, if my income's 279,190, I'll get half of that 17,280. If my expenses or special needs gets me to 17,280, that income being in the halfway point, it will half that amount. The amount that I get refundable in 2025 is 5,000. That's new this year. Next year for 2026, or this year, I guess currently, but next year's taxes will be 5,120. That has been published. And as I said, this is a one-time credit per child. So there are a lot of children in the foster care system who are adopted as siblings, and this would apply to each and every one of them if they get that adoption assistance or you have expenses. So, and I see something about PLC. People use different terms, but that's permanent legal custody or guardianship. That is not adoption. This does not apply to them, unfortunately. But that is something that I think if we were to keep advocating to make this credit better, is something we should try and add to the table, because there are a lot more children finding permanency through guardianship or PLC or PMC or whatever your state calls it, and those families should also have access to extra support too. So the income test and filing status are pretty important only in the year you're claiming the credit. So that income test is only applied in the year you're claiming the credit, not in subsequent years if you have any carry forward. And that's just how the form works. The carry forward, just like unfortunately, the carry forward comes in after a lot of things happen. One of the things that happen is that refundability. So that refundability doesn't apply to the carry forward, either from 25 into 26. 26 won't be able to get anything refundable, or anybody that has credit from 2024 all the way back to 2020 coming into 2025, that will not be refundable. So that income test is only applied in the year you're claiming the credit. So here's story time. I have a lot of them. I've been helping people with this adoption credit, as I said, since 2004. So back probably like 2007 or 8, there was a family that didn't know about this credit, and they adopted a sibling group of 4. I believe it was in Kansas. That year, they sold the family farm. That spiked their income that year. And when they did that, they were over income and they couldn't get this. Had they known, they wouldn't have done them in the same year, but they didn't know, so they lost out. The next year, the year after they adopted, they can't file for it because that's not how the rules work. They have to file for it the year they finalized because it was adoptions from foster care and it was considered special needs. So like in an ideal world, they would have finalized in year one, and in year two sold the family farm and have over 40,000 in adoption credit minus whatever they used in year one available to help with any like capital gains or anything that they might have to pay for selling that property. That would be the ideal world, but that's not what happened. So this income test is only applied the year you're claiming the credit. Tied into this is married filing separately. If some people file separately, you can't in the year you have adopted and are claiming the credit. If you're married, you either have to file jointly or head of household. You only can file head of household if you're truly separated. You're truly separated if you've lived apart from your spouse during the last 6 months of the year, the eligible child lived in your home more than half the year, and you provided over half the cost of keeping up your home. Those make you truly separated, and you file head of household, not married filing separately. The most common reasons I've heard over the years of why people file separately, and they could do that in year two and just assign the carry forward to whoever they want in year two, but not in year one. The most common reasons I've had is one person, they're married now, but came in with some back taxes that they owe. So one files separately, maybe claims children, gets child tax credit, maybe earned income credit, etc. So they can get that benefit, but not have the back taxes owed by the other partner reduce their refund. That's a them decision. Don't miss out on this credit for that. This will help pay down those back taxes, and you can do whatever you want in year two. The other one I've heard is people doing public service loan forgiveness. Sometimes for their loan provider, they'll file married and filing separate so that the one person who's like maybe a teacher and is providing their income, not their spouse's income, they're doing it that way. What I've seen on Facebook, don't hold me to, that's Facebook, take that with a huge grain of salt, is that there can be other ways to provide the individual's income to loan service providers, and do that. Don't miss out on the $17,280 per child. Reach out to the loan service provider and see if there's another way to document that. Don't file separately and miss out on this. But those are the two most common. Year two, your income, I could win I could get like a huge job, get $1 million a year, being way over income, but if I had some carry forward left over, I'd still have access to it because the income test would not apply to the carry forward. And my filing status, I could be married and I go back to filing separately, not head of household, not jointly, separately. That would be totally okay in year two because the income test, which this filing status is sort of tied to, only applies in year one when you're claiming the credit. So, all right. So new for 2025, the adoption tax credit is partially refundable. And I'm going to explain later on how exactly that works. But when they pass that bill, 5,000 of the 17,280 per child is refundable. It will only apply to credit claimed this year. As I said earlier, not to any carry forward credit from adoptions from prior years, 2020 through 2024. It will not apply to any carry forward into year two of using the adoption tax credit. So if I don't use it all up this year, next year I can only use it against my tax liability, which I will explain later also. But just want to put that out there. So when to file the adoption tax credit. For international adoptions, it's in the year the adoption is final. For special needs adoptions without expenses, it's in the year the adoption is final. For private domestic adoptions, it's either the year the adoption is final, or if not final, the year after the expenses were paid. So if I started the process, let's say in 2024, and I paid my agency $3,000 in 2024, In 2025, I got matched with an expectant mother, child's born. I got placement of that child in December of 2025, but it's not finalized yet. Private adoptions generally 6 months before you finalize. So that'll be finalized sometimes this year. That $3,000 I paid in 2024, I can claim that on my 2025 taxes. I can do that also if there isn't a child or expectant mother identified yet. You can do it in that case. In that case, we have to go back to the 2009 instructions, I believe, to see the advice. But basically, you want to provide information about the agency or attorney that you're working with and that you're paying. And you may, if they ask for expenses, they may have to provide an affidavit about the expenses that you paid to them. But you can do that. Now, the one thing I do want to highlight here, they're probably not going to need it as much, but that $5,000 that I'm talking about, refundable, the way I'm reading it and looking at the forms, and I've been doing it, like I said, over 20 years, it looks like they could get refundable for new credits in year 2 that's newly claimed credit in year 2. So like if I took $3,000 in 2025, and then let's say I paid another, let's just say $20,000 between 2025 and 2026 to finalize the adoption, so a total of $23,000, I should be able to get $3,000 of that refundable for my 2025 taxes, and then in 2026 when I do my taxes, there's that 17,670 will be the maximum. It'll be minus the 3,000 I already claim, but of that 14,670, I should be able to get another 5,000 refundable that year, is my reading of it. Until we see next year's forms and how they do things, but nothing I've seen this year would preclude that for private domestic adoptions that take multiple, or with credit spread out over years. One thing that does happen with private domestic adoptions is sometimes there are unsuccessful adoption attempts. And if I'm matched with an expectant mother, the adoption doesn't happen for whatever reason, and then I later am matched with another one, and I do successfully adopt, all my expenses for both of those will count for one child. Even though in the world we all know those are two different children, the IRS has very clearly said in the instructions that those are considered one adoption attempt, the second part being successful. So just want to put that out there. And always reach out to me if you have questions. Special needs for the adoption credit. This is something that our organization led in 2001 to separate special needs from expenses. And because special needs is so similar to adoption subsidy, where we are already helping people, and I'm kind of a math nerd, we figured we would be people that should be experts on this. And so we're kind of experts on this, more than most people in the adoption world. They'll usually tell you, talk to your tax preparer. This is not what I'm telling you. I'm telling you how it works, and you can do this on your own. So children who receive adoption assistance are considered special needs as determined by the state. The state determination means they are special needs. Like, you can't get adoption assistance without the state determining the child's special needs. And just to really clarify, special needs also means hard to place. It can be a child of a certain age. Like in Indiana, any child adopted from DCS is considered special needs. In Illinois, it's 1. Some states, it's like 6. Could be 10. It depends on the state. It could be race. It could be sibling group. Sibling group in most states, sibling group of 2 can qualify. It doesn't matter why the child qualified for adoption assistance. All that matters is they receive it. And if I got any Washington State folks on here, I'm talking about adoption support. So adoption subsidy, adoption assistance. That's what's key. New this year, and I didn't put it in the slide, but I'll update it before Becky puts it out, is tribal nations. If the child is part of a tribal nations can also make a special needs determination, and we don't know what that will look like. Some tribal nations do have agreements with their states and may provide adoption assistance just like children adopted from the state foster care system, but they may have their own programs that look very different because there are hundreds of tribal nations, and they are nations. They get to set how what their support, their adoption assistance looks like. I have not seen any guidance from the IRS on that, but I did help work with NCWA to try and make it really clear that they're not all going to look the same from there. For families who do their own taxes, if the child is considered special needs, you'd need to mark the child as special needs. But where it asks about if the child has disabilities, do not put no. That is only for kids over the age of 18 at the time of adoption. If the child is determined special needs, when it asks about expenses, enter the full $17,280 into the software. Depending on the software, checking special needs may automatically populate that. I've seen that for some software, not all of them. If it asks you like court expenses, stuff like that, that's more for private and international adoptions, helping families think about the different types of expenses that qualify and that they can put in there. If you don't have out-of-pocket expenses but the child's special needs, just put in other expenses, put in the full amount. If you hire someone, and you totally can hire someone, what you need to point them to is what's going to be on these next two slides, but you need to advocate for yourself and say, listen, my child's considered special needs because I get adoption subsidy, adoption assistance, adoption support, and because of that, I get to qualify for the full amount. Some tax preparers know that, but the reality is there are only like 100,000 of these done a year, and I think there's over 100 million returns done a year. The likelihood that your tax preparer doesn't see that, try and educate them first. If they won't listen to you, if they will charge you to research it, if they say no, you're wrong, shop around. There are options. If you do your own taxes, you can still do your own taxes. But be prepared to be maybe a little frightened by some really big numbers. And you can always reach out to me and we can try and figure things out for you. So here are the two parts. I'm not going to read all this because it's painful. It's written by the lovely lady who was a lawyer at the IRS who's retired, but written for government bureaucracy and legalese. But I just want to highlight these in here. Middle of the second paragraph, Agency A providing the adoptive parents with monthly subsidy payments on behalf of each child. The adoption assistance agreements entered into between Agency A and the adoptive parents are evidence that State V has determined that Mark, Rachel, and Janet are children with special needs. Their adoptive parents may claim an adoption credit for each child, even if the adoptive parents paid no qualified adoption expenses, if all of the requirements of the credit are met. So a couple things I'm going to highlight here. One, the example talks about 3 siblings and their ages, no disabilities, just reinforcing it's not necessarily about a child with a disability. It's about the assistance from the state. The other thing I want to highlight, I need to reach out and see if I can get this changed. I should have done that before she retired. But adoption assistance agreements have 3 components. And many states, not all states, many states will do $0 agreements that have Medicaid and may have reimbursement of non-recurring adoption expenses. Often it can be up to $2,000, it can be lower, often for helping with attorney fees. If you have an agreement that provides one of those 3 components, I can't represent you in tax court, but if you have one of those $0 agreements with Medicaid and or the reimbursement, that to me is proof of special needs because it's in the adoption assistance agreement, and I can share with you, I'm also not a lawyer or a tax preparer, the legal reasoning I came up with combining the language from the federal language for adoption assistance as well as the federal language for adoption tax credit. I came up with a strong reasoning at one point, but I haven't put it out there because I'm not a lawyer, but I'm happy to share it with you. So even though this says the monthly subsidy payments, I believe, and that lawyer who did retire did say back in the day, as long as one of those 3 components, but she has no power anymore. She's retired. So I can't call on her to help in a situation like that. Line 5 is where on the form that you're not filling out, unless you're going old school doing it by hand, the software is filling this out. Whether you're doing it yourself, using software, or you're hiring someone, they're using software. There's very few people that do it by hand. But line 5 is where the form says qualified adoption expenses. And forever and a day, it said see instructions. And in the instructions was this: special needs adoption. If you adopted a U.S. child with special needs and the adoption became final in 2025, enter on line 5, 17,280 minus any qualified adoption expenses you used to figure any adoption you claimed for the same child in a prior year. This is the amount you entered on line 3 of form 8839 for this child. So like in my private agency example where I paid $3,000 in 2024, that's where this would show up, is this part right here. There'd be 3,000 on the second bullet point. If you didn't claim any adoption credit for the child in a prior year, enter 17,280 on line 5, even if your qualified adoption expenses for the child were less than 17,280, and even if you didn't have any qualified adoption expenses for this child. Okay, so this is really clear in the instructions. You know, this is the thing. If you're hiring someone and they're pushing back, like, these are the two parts you lead them to: line 1, column D, example 1, and special needs definition under line 5. As I said, if they won't look at it, they don't understand it, they'll tell you they're going to charge you to look it up, shop around, but you don't need to hire someone else. And this is back in the instructions. It had been in a previous publication. It disappeared. It didn't come in with the instructions when they got rid of that old publication. And before I knew anybody at the IRS, I'm like, hey, we need more explicit language for tax preparers because they can't read between the lines like I've been doing for the last 3 years. And so this showed back up the next year, and I'm like, wow, an email worked. And this is now in the instructions. I mean, it's not anything new. It was similar language, but it got back in the instructions because of me. And it was totally to make my life easier. Employer adoption assistance. If your employer has an adoption assistance program, that's different than subsidy from the state for adopting a foster child, that helps employees with adoption expenses, that can be excluded from your income, and that is not part of the adoption credit, but it is on part 3 of form 8839. If you are doing a private or international adoption, the qualified adoption expenses are used for the exclusion first and then the credit. So let's say I have a total of $25,000 for my adoption, and my work that I paid for my private adoption, and my work had a program, and I got $10,000 from it. What's going to happen is I exclude that $10,000. It doesn't count as income, even though it shows up on your W-2. It doesn't count as income, and then that remaining $15,000 I can then take as the adoption tax credit. I don't run into this a lot. This is a newer slide that I've added in the last year or two, or maybe this was the first year. I think last year was the first year I did it. But I do want to put it out there because some families do benefit from it. If your adoption is determined as special needs, because you adopt from the foster care system, you can exclude the full amount, $17,280, no matter how much the employer provided you in assistance. They have to have a program. The employer has to have a program that does that meets the IRS requirements. But if they do, and they don't even pay you a penny because you adopted through foster care, you could still claim the exclusion. It's complicated, but you still get the full amount of the credit too. That's what the special needs is. It's like if you're playing cards, it's like a Trump suit in cards. If people, like hearts or something, like not hearts. If you play cards and you understand Trump suits, it's sort of what it is. That special needs qualifies you for the full amount. Filing and record keeping. For the years 2010, for sure 2011 and 12, families had to paper file. Starting 2013, they didn't. And so what you should still be able to e-file for this. Private domestic adoptions without a taxpayer ID number for the child, or the child isn't known yet, my experience has been they will have to paper file. I have not heard from anybody in this situation this year. But for the child, you want to put down C attached and information, and then attach information about the agency or attorney. Um, in 2010 and 11, when the adoption tax credit was refundable, the IRS was requiring families to submit documentation proving the adoption occurred, and then either they had qualified adoption expenses or a special needs determination. I have not seen anything this year about submitting that, and I just was on a IRS outreach webinar on this, and they didn't talk about it at all either. That and I just want to preface this though. In 2010, the people who wrote the instructions and the people doing processing were not talking, and families families who submitted the adoption tax credit then later on had to submit documentations under what's called a correspondent audit, not a full audit, just they needed to document the thing, that the adoption occurred and expenses or special needs. So this is what you want to do. Documenting the adoption. For all domestic adoptions, whether it's from foster care or private domestic, you want a court decree, the papers from the judge or the court that shows that you adopted. For international adoptions, foreign adoption decree translated into English, Hague adoption certificate, and some visas can work. And it can vary based on if it's a Hague country or non-Hague country. And I can get you some information on that. For special needs adoption, you need proof that the state has determined the child has special needs. That's going to be your adoption assistance agreement. Some states, I know Washington State in the past has just sent out letters saying they determine the child has special needs. And what they've told me is pretty much everybody qualifies for adoption support in that state. There are states where almost every child adopted from foster care qualifies for adoption subsidy, but it's not the case in every state. For private domestic and international adoptions that are not determined special needs, you should keep copies of bills, receipts, and proof of payment to show that you had qualified adoption expenses and that you paid them. When they were doing correspondent audits in 2011, 2012 for the 10 and 11 tax season, they didn't just want an invoice from the agency. They wanted bank documents showing that they paid that benefit. They wanted, like I can just generate something and make it look all official and you can run with it. But the big thing with this is if you've got big bills that get you over the amount, don't sweat the little ones. Like back in 2011, we were having people like, I adopted from China and, I have faded, credit card receipt from this dim sum restaurant we went to while we were in country. I'm like, we're talking, like $10, $20, $30. Like, look at what your agency fees are, your lawyer fees, look at, airplane costs, travel costs, things like that. You don't sweat the little small receipts. If you can get over with the big ones, let it go. Like Elsa and Frozen, let it go. Don't worry about those little ones. Focus on the big ones. So after this, Becky, think about any questions you want to ask me because this will be a break before my next section. So I'm comparing this is a new slide I made today. So as you can see at the top, first column is the topic, then foster care adoption, private, domestic, and international adoption. So qualified adoption expenses, foster care adoptions usually don't have them, but yes, or special needs qualifies for the full amount, but both private and domestic, that's primarily what they're looking for. Special needs, that's primarily going to be adoption from foster care. There can be private domestic adoptions that come with subsidy, and if they do, you get to top it off. It's not common. It's going to be for a child with significant disability. Typically, that's going to qualify for SSI, or it could be a subsequent adoption. Like if I adopted a child, something happened to me, I got subsidy, something happened to me later on, Becky adopts the child after something happens to me, but she doesn't go back through the state. She can apply for subsidy before finalizing that child, and that would qualify there. International adoptions are not eligible as special needs by law, even if the child has a disability. It's just how the law is written. It's only for U.S. citizens or residents. But generally, international adoptions already are going to have high enough expenses that it's not something they need to top off. Because all the special needs does is let them get to the full amount without having expenses. There's nothing other special that it does. Timing, finalization, for foster care adoption, finalization, no qualified adoption expenses, Same with international. There can be some flexibility depending on Hague or non-Hague country. There's something called safe harbors. If you're questioning that, especially if you might be over income in one year and not another year, reach out to me. I'll get you the revenue procedures on that explain it. I don't know it super well, but I know where it is and that there's information out there. Private domestic, the year after paid, the QAE is paid if not finalized, otherwise when it's finalized. Documenting the adoption, court decree, translated finalization, visa, Hague, certificate, etc. Documenting QA or special needs subsidy agreement or receipts, subsidy agreement or receipts, and then receipts. And finally, just want to reiterate before we end this section, and Becky gives me some questions. Adoption of your spouse's child are not eligible for the adoption tax credit. So, Becky, I know you've been typing away. Thank you so much. You're awesome.
Um, so some folks are asking specifically about state grants and adoption tax credits and how that works with the federal adoption tax credit. An
So,
Ohio grant came up a number of times.
oh, that I'll have to research. So, those folks should email me, and I'll have to research that. I have not tracked down the switch from a credit to the grants that Ohio's doing. But the one thing I will say is if they get adoption subsidy, it doesn't matter. They qualify for the whole amount. The only thing where that would come into play is if I get a grant, and I'd have to look into it, but I get a grant that is like is offsetting what I paid out of pocket for like a private, domestic, or international adoption. Then that might not be qualified adoption expense if it's reimbursed by a government source. But those folks should reach out to me. But if they get the subsidy, if it's for a kid they adopted from foster care and they get the subsidy, then it shouldn't impact that at all.
Okay, so they're still claiming the full amount, but
If it's special needs, yeah.
yeah, okay. And there is some confusion about carry forwards. And so will a 2023 adoption once carry forward to 2025 get this $5,000?
Unfortunately, um, any credit coming in from earlier years into 2025 do not access the 5,000 that's refundable. It was
Okay.
not my hope, and I honestly, it's against the precedent they set in 2010. But I don't make the rules. I just get very disappointed when others make.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there are a few questions about special needs. And will you mention again about special needs for the sake of the adoption tax credit as related to adoption subsidy? And then one child, I think, is privately adopted and has special needs and how that's different.
Okay. The key is so states get to define what is special needs for qualifying for the adoption subsidy from that the state pays them ongoing, um, and that can be age, race, sibling status, disabilities. It can also be length in care or length out of the birth family's home. Um, so there can be a couple of different things that can qualify children. The key issue is that the state has determined, and now tribal agencies has to determine the child is special needs. And if we go back a couple of slides, in here, and it's in the before this, but it says um, in the first part that I skipped over, the children were removed from their biological parents. They were placed in the foster care. The agency determined it would be difficult to place the children for adoption without providing assistance to the family because of the ages and sibling relationships of the children. So there's this determination that needs to be made for this adoption assistance. And there was a case in Florida where a child met the state definition of special needs. It wasn't actually a disability. It was a child of African American heritage, and the family filed the child as special needs because the child met the state definition of special needs, but the state didn't determine it by providing that adoption assistance, and so it was disqualified. They only got it based on the expenses they paid out of pocket. So even if I'm adopting a child with significant disabilities privately, domestically, if I don't get that adoption assistance, I only get it based on the expenses I paid for the adoption. I don't get it as special needs in the full amount if my expenses were less than the full amount.
Thank you.
Yep,
And Alex would like confirmation that kinship foster families who receive adoption assistance post-adoption, that qualifies them as special needs adoption.
absolutely.
And so, yeah, Alex, they claim the full credit.
Yep.
Um, and there's a question about PLC. I don't know what that stands for.
Permanent legal custodian.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I was answering that live earlier, and it's not adoption. And it'd be nice to clean up federal code related to a foster care, adoption, and guardianship, both with the assistance that is provided by the states, but also the types of credits that are out there, and make this not just an adoption credit but a permanency credit. But that probably won't happen quickly, but it's something that I definitely can raise for the future, but it's not current law.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one last question
Sure.
for partners who are not married, how do they claim the credit?
It's a good question. If they've both adopted, they should be able to split the full amount between the two of them, how they see fit. I'd have to double check on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the answer. If only one of them has done the actual adoption, because sometimes they only let the one adopt, and then later they do a second parent adoption. But if that's the case, then it should all be on the one person. Um, but
Okay.
they can reach out to me and I can just double check. I can't remember if that's directly in instructions, but that's my recollection of how that works. I haven't had that question come up in a while, but yeah, I'm quite certain that's how it would work out.
Okay, thank you. And those are the questions for now.
Oh, yeah, put in my correct email, Becky, as I
Yeah,
respond. Okay, thanks. It's Josh K. Um,
yep.
yeah,
I'll add that in. Thank you.
no problem. All right, so I'm going to explain now how the credit works, and then I'm going to go into some of the prior year stuff and more. But I'll be available. Email right now will probably be the best because it will help me keep things straight. Because when all of you reach out to me at once, it helps if I can follow the email trail. Because if I'm calling you back, I'm just gonna tell you right now. I was like, wait, are you the person who adopted 3 kids and make 20,000 a year, or are you the person that adopted 3 kids last year and made 180 last year? Things blend at this time of year for me. So the emails help a lot. So claim we're defining words. I can be very loosey goosey on this. I try to be very specific because it's taxes. They're scary. Math is involved, so you want to be precise. So claim. This means you're filing that you're eligible to get the credit. I think of it as being like a town crier saying, IRS, I'm filling out this form. I adopted a child considered special needs in 2025, and I'm claiming it, 17,280. I'm filling out this form, hitting those prompts the right way. I'm announcing to the world this happened. It's showing up on this form. Use your ability to use the credit is going to be tied to, can you access any refundability plus any tax liability you have for the year. Your tax liability is the amount you're responsible for in federal income tax for the year. So this is my base example. I've been using stuff like this forever. So let's say in 2024, families rising withheld $4,000 from my paychecks to pay my federal income tax. So I get my W-2 and it says federal income tax withholding $4,000. Okay. When I complete my taxes, the tax tables say, I mean, it's software, but the tax tables say I owe $3,000 in income tax. And my life is boring and vanilla. I have no other credits and no other taxes. The, the big one in other taxes that sucks is self-employment tax. If you pay that, the non-refundable portion of the adoption tax credit does not help with that. The 5,000 will help with the self-employment tax, but otherwise it does not when we're only looking against tax liability. So in a normal year, if this is my situation, you would think I get $1,000 back because that would be right. Hopefully you all came up with that. I overpaid $1,000. So a couple things here. Anybody old school like me, ever done their taxes by hand? Most people, what they owe in income tax is that number they took back from the tax tables. There's things that can be added to it, but most people have pretty boring taxes. And if you've ever done your taxes by hand, you got to that point, it's like, go look at the book and there's all these columns and stuff and pull back a number. That's your tax liability for most people. It can be a little higher than that, but generally that's what it is. Now, I always use an example. I've always used like an example like this, refundable or not refundable, because we don't want people self-selecting out and missing out on benefits to them because they don't understand how taxes work. In this example, I got 1,000 packs back. So some people are like, Josh doesn't owe any taxes. You know, he got a refund, so he didn't owe anything. So this credit without refundability wouldn't help him at all. That is not true. I owed $3,000 in income tax. Think about this. If I buy a fancy chocolate bar, I go to a store and I actually have cash, and that fancy chocolate bar costs $3. I give them a $5 bill. They give me $2 back. That didn't mean that fancy chocolate bar was free. It meant I gave them more money than they needed. And so they paid me back my change. That's what a refund is. And sometimes it's off of refundable credits and you're getting back more than you paid in, but it's what you get back at the end is the end of the ledger. It's looking at all your payments and all your taxes and which is higher, which is lower, and figuring out, do you get a refund or do you have to pay? So don't just not take this credit because of that. With an adoption of one child in 2025 that is considered special needs, I'm going to announce to the IRS, I'm going to fill out my tax forms, $17,280 in adoption tax credit. Okay? And we're going to magically say that my taxes are exactly the same from last year, $4,000 withheld. The tax tables will magically say $3,000 again. It's not going to work out exactly that way, but you know, it could. But we're going to use it for simplicity's sake. So my tax liability is $3,000. It is reduced by, that number's wrong. It's reduced by $500 in child tax credit and $2,500 in adoption tax credit. So it's reduced by $500 in child tax credit, $2,500 in adoption tax credit. That combines to $3,000, drops my tax liability to zero. I have no other taxes, no other credits. My total tax will be zero. My payments are $4,000 in withholdings. And then I have $1,700 in refundable additional child tax credit. Okay, so this year, the child tax credit is $2,200 per child under the age of 17. If you have enough earned income, it can split to $500 and $1,700. And there's more that goes into it. It's all, if you ever try and do it by hand, let me just tell you, you don't want to. Let the software do it. But that's how it would work out if I had enough earned income. And it wouldn't be that high for one child. So my payments are $4,000 in withholdings, $1,700 in refundable additional child tax credit, and $5,000, because this is the year I adopted. This is the year I'm claiming the credit, $5,000 in refundable adoption tax credit for a total of $10,700, which will be the size of my refund because I have total taxes zero. Now, that's up from $1,000 the year before. Where did that all come from? We have $5,000 in refundable adoption tax credit. We have $2,200 split in child tax credit, and then another $2,500 in adoption credit. That adds up to the extra $9,700 that I got. Now what's going to happen is I will have used up $7,500, so I'll have $9,780 in carry forward for 2026. So next year when I do my taxes, I'll carry forward $9,780, and depending on everything. I mean, right now the law is I won't be able to use any of it refundable, and if I use up another 2,500, then going into 2027, I'll have whatever that is, 7,280 available. So that's how it works, and I do that until I use the credit up, or a total of 5 years, or total of 6 years have passed. I have 5 additional years, or a total of 6 years. So 2025, 6 is year 2, 7 is year 3, 8 is year 4, 9 is year 5, and 2030 is year 6. That's the final year to use it if I haven't used it up beforehand. One of the ways I've always described this is think about it as like a big holiday meal, like Thanksgiving or something, and you have all these leftovers. Well, you keep doing that until your leftovers have either gone bad after 2030, or everybody ate them up because they were delicious and everybody couldn't eat them all on Thanksgiving Day. So that's how taxes work. So folks like the person who was asking, they adopted in 2023, they have credit coming into 2025, they're not going to get this 5,000 part. They're only going to be able to access it like the rest of this, but without that extra 5,000. So in this example, they would get 5,700, not the 10,700. Yeah, and as I said, you have 5 additional years to use the credit. Prior years, you can amend prior years. People all the time are learning about this credit, or they were told bad information, or they didn't understand it, and they're like, what do we do now? And sometimes people will say, oh, I'll just start filing for it now. As you saw earlier with the special needs, that was for an adoption finalized in 2025, not for an adoption finalized in 2022. So you got to go back and amend those years. And there are timing restrictions also for private, domestic, and international. The IRS only allows you to get a refund within 3 years. So if you think about it, your 2022 taxes were due April 15th, 2023. 3 years later is April 15th, 2026. If you file early, you still have till April 15th, but 2022 is the furthest back you can get money for. For folks that adopted prior to that, you might be able to get some, but we need to talk because I don't want you to waste time or money ahead of time. So what would happen is for the years 2017 to 2021, you would claim and use the credit like you timely filed for that adoption credit. So like in my previous example, not refundable, I used 2,500. Well, that means minus 2,500, I can carry credit into the next year. Now, is that next year 2018? That's close. I got to keep doing that. Or is it 2021? All of a sudden, 2022, the next year is open. So with this, you might have to do a lot of years or only 1 year, but you need to figure that out first. It's best to talk with me because I can help figure out what likely will happen. Some people may have no tax liability in 2022 or later years, and it might not be worth doing. Or families may use up all the credit in the closed years. Like if I adopted in 2017, I just found out about this, but it's like, oh, I use up all whatever it was, 14,000, in years 2017 through 2021. I don't want you to waste time, and especially I don't want you to waste money trying to go back and get something if you're not going to. Social Security cards, and I'll be open for questions after this slide, Becky, or maybe it's the next, after this slide. Social Security cards. The IRS processes the tax returns based on what the Social Security Administration has as information about the child. So if you've adopted a child and you haven't changed their names yet, you're waiting on birth certificate to go to the Social Security and update that information with them, you file with what the IRS knows that child as, not what the courts necessarily know that child is. If you haven't updated it, name or number, go with that. The IRS told us more than a decade ago that this was people in processing, not writing the instructions, that they can see the changes after they've happened. They have access to that data. And so the advice was, don't hold off on filing for the adoption tax credit until you change the name and or number and then go back and amend. You can file for it with the original name and number now. And then if it gets updated, let's say this summer, and I wouldn't start the updating process until I had the refund in hand, just to be really honest with you on that. But on next year's return, you use the new information, and the people in processing said they have access to that, and that is the proper way to do it. So, and I do know an enrolled agent who also says that. That's the highest level of certification for IRS tax preparers. For the child tax credit, the child must have a social security number by the due date. If the child doesn't, you can file for an extension and have until October 15th to obtain that social security number and access the 2200 in child tax credit. This is particularly challenging. A lot of times private domestic adoptions, they'll wait 6 months to finalize, and then they'll apply for social security number at that time. And after they have the new updated birth certificate, amended birth certificate with the adoptive parents' names on it, that creates a problem if you want access to 2200. You cannot go back and amend if you didn't have the social security number on time. Like if I had placement of a child in December, born in December, placed in December, we're going to finalize in May or June. If I want that 2200, I'm going to file an extension so I can have access to that. So just want to put that out there because it's important, and a lot of people are not aware of that. So, all right, Becky, I'm sure you have a lot of questions.
Yes, sorry. Um,
No problem. We got a
so
good group.
um, a question about an employer having paid all the adoption related expenses, and can they still claim the credit?
They will file the form, but if all of their qualified adoption expenses were paid as by the employer adoption assistance program, those will all be taken as an exclusion. So that assistance, that money from the employer is not taxed, but they won't get a adoption tax credit on it. They would if they had more expenses that the employer didn't fully cover.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then can you address if the children's names changed, and about getting new social security numbers or not?
I mean, you ultimately families are going to want to get that sorted in the world, um, but in terms of filing for the adoption tax credit, if you don't want to wait, use what the IRS knows. But at some point you want those to match up, especially as more and more things happen in our society where they're requiring that all the various documentations match up. You'll want to do that.
Okay.
Reach out to the Social Security Administration and you know talk with them and figure out what documentations they need to document. That'll probably be court decree, maybe the amended birth certificate, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm guessing at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think you've answered most of these other questions, so it depends on when they came. They probably asked them prior to you answering.
Um,
And just to let everybody know, you will receive a recording of this session, and it will go to the email address that you registered with.
and I'll have time. I got through this a lot faster than I thought I would, even with all the questions, with what I know I have left. So we'll have some time, and I'll go through questions in the chat too.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mean,
We'll have more time for a little bit of this, and I'll look through some of the chat and see what's in there too.
okay, great. Thank
Yep.
you.
All right. So the last part I'm going to do is claiming children as dependents, and this is geared a little more towards those who foster to adopt and maybe still fostering and haven't adopted yet. Um, so claiming children, because there's a lot of confusion out there, and I'm going to cover some of them too. But this is from IRS publication 501. So, claiming children as dependents, there are 5 tests that must be met. The first is there's a relationship test. then an age test, residency test, support test, and the funniest one, which you'll understand when we get to it, is the joint test. So, relationship test. To be a qualifying child, to meet this test, a child must be your son, daughter, stepchild, foster child, or a descendant of any of them, like a grandchild. Your brother, sister, half brother, half sister, stepbrother, stepsister, or descendant of any of them. Adopted child. An adopted child is treated as your own child. The term adopted includes a child who is lawfully placed with you for legal adoption. And a foster child is an individual who is placed with you by an authorized placement agency or by judgment, decree, or other order of any court of competent jurisdiction. So one thing I really want to highlight here is foster child. A lot of times people are like, oh, you can't claim your foster child. And it's like, well, why is it listed specifically in an IRS publication that meets the test? That doesn't make any sense that you can't claim the foster child. And you can. Now, we're going to get into the support test and residency test are the other two big ones that we're going to deal with in a second. But the other thing I want to highlight here before we get to those is sometimes I hear some crazy stuff like, oh, well, you get foster care payments for the child. If you're going to claim the child as a dependent, then you have to report that as income. And that is not true. There are some rare instances where you would report foster payments as income, but not generally. That would be more like if you have a lot of really high need kids, or you have if you're like paid to keep a bed open for emergency placements, those potentially could be something you have to pay for. But generally, foster care payments are not taxable. You don't put them here. Adoption assistance payments, adoption subsidy payments, not the employer ones, but the ones from the states and counties, those are not taxable. That is in a 1974 ruling. So there are a lot of people that, I mean, I'll tell you really clearly when I don't know something. I have ideas, but I'm not gonna. I'll couch them of I think. People who say things like that are not being accurate. Age test. This is pretty straightforward. To meet this test, child must be under the age of 19 at the end of the year and younger than you, or a student under the age of 24 and younger than you, or permanently and totally disabled at any time of the year, regardless of age. I don't know how that permanently and totally disabled is defined, but it's the same thing for adopting a child over, or a young adult over the age of 18. If you're ever in that boat, I would be happy to try and see if I can get an answer, but I don't know the answer to that. Residency test. Now, this and the support test on the next slide are the two biggies, especially for foster families. To meet this test, your child must have lived with you for more than half the year. There are exceptions for temporary absences, children who were born or died during the year, kidnapped children, and children of divorced or separated parents. Now, I think this has always been the case, but about a decade ago, they added in this language just to clarify things, because you'll hear things, especially if you're in Facebook groups, and they're a great source of information, but they're also a source of misinformation at times, where they're like 6 months in a year, and I'm like math nerd geek, and so I'm like, no, we're not doing 6 months in a year. We're saying if it's a leap year, 184 days. If it's a non-leap year, 183 days. Because it's 365, which is 182.5, rounded up, 183. Leap year, it's 366 days. Half of that's 183. It's more than half the year, 184 days. I don't know if your child's placed with you on day 183 or 184, or, and then you have 183 or 84 days, but that's what I go with. The same is also true, though, if the child lived with you for more than half the year, required any hospital stays following birth, child born or died during the year. So what we're talking about here is, let's say a child's born November 1st, November's got 30 days, December's got 31, that's 61 days. If I have that child at least 31 days, I meet the residency test. And only one family can meet the more than half the year. That will knock out other foster families. That will knock out, it might knock out adoptive parent. Well, not likely adoptive parents, but if they got the child late and it was a quick adoption, usually it's 6 months also, so it's probably not them. It can knock out birth families. That happens in the world, but the key is who has that child for more than half the year, and that knocks out everybody else, because only one person can be the king of that hill. Support test. To meet this test, the child can't have provided more than half of his or her own support for the year. Explicitly, and this test changed about 20 years ago, explicitly in the instructions, the foster care payments and expenses are considered support provided by the agency, not the child, and actually make it harder for the child to provide more than half of his or her own support. Um, we don't see adoption assistance in this, but I do have a copy of a letter that the Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition of New York got from the IRS. It's probably not, it's something we would run with, but it's probably not high enough to, I mean, it's something we could bring up if things went to tax court, but it's not as high as like a revenue ruling. It's probably a private letter ruling, not even chief counsel advice. Those are the three levels I'm aware of from the work I've done over the years. But it's something we can go. But the reality is, when I've had families question with this, they're usually being asked, showing that they provide more than half the support. That's not the test for a qualifying child. There is a qualifying relative definition, and there you have to support more than half provide more than half the support for the child, and that's where the subsidy or foster care payments would count against you. So like if I'm getting $500 a month for the full year, that's $6,000 annually. I'd have to show I'm spending another $6,001, but that's not the right test. So what I've run in, the few times I've run in families dealing with that issue, I just tell them, hey, ask them why they're applying the qualifying relative support test, not the qualifying child. Why is this not a qualifying child, and why aren't they using that support test? I don't know that I ever got feedback knowing that works, but that's what I would start with. And if anybody ever runs into that and uses that, please let me know that works, because it makes sense that it would. They don't always know what they're doing. Joint return test. To be a qualifying child, they can't file a joint return. They only do that when they're married. So if your child is married, then you can't file a child tax credit on them if they're filing a joint return for that year. So those are the 5 tests. Now, we know that other people claim children that don't meet the residency test. It could be the birth family. Sometimes that number's out in the world. It could be a foster family who doesn't know better, but they had the child and they thought they met the residency test and they didn't. So if someone else claims a child before you do, you're going to set to submit, or it's going to bounce back at you if you're doing your own taxes. Same for your tax repair, because someone already has filed a child tax credit for that same child. So your options are, you can file without that child and amend later on to claim the child. This would be my recommendation if you're going to get a sizable refund and you want that quickly. I would do it that way. I mean, when the adoption tax credit was fully refundable in 2010-11, even though it was big money, there was huge slowdowns with all the documentation and the review the IRS was doing. So we often told people to file without the adoption tax credit once they got their refund, amend, and then file the adoption tax credit. Because, I mean, we're not talking weeks, we're talking months and months. It was very frustrating. You can paper file. Let's say you would owe money, but you got a sibling group of 3, and $6,600 makes it go from you owing money to you getting a refund. Well, I don't want to pay money and then have to get that money back from them. So I might paper file and then do that with supporting documentation. And really, what I've always heard, and other people I've seen people say they did it successfully, is get information from the agency or the county, state, saying that the children were with you from date to date in the tax year. And I would really encourage, I'm a little nitpicky at time, that it's the tax year, not like the child was placed with you, December, whatever day, and then through current or whatever. These are bureaucrats. They're number crunchers. They got to check things. If the child's still with you, like right now, I would still have them say through December 31st of 2025. And if they were placed with me, you could do the placement date before 2025, or you could just do January 1st, 2025 through December 31st, 2025. I don't think that part matters as much, but I would definitely have that end date say that they're still with you. Um, showing that you met the residency test to knock everybody else out. King of the Hill. Long-term solutions, because sometimes families face this year after year. If the child's adopted, see if you can get that social security number changed. Um, if you can't change the number, try and get an identity protection pin. That's something people can do. If you're still fostering the child and it's happening year after year, I don't know that you probably can't get the social security number changed, but you may not be able to get an IP pin for the child. You'd have to talk with the agency or the state to see if they would allow you to do that. They may not, but those are solutions that exist in the world. So it's really annoying for families to keep having to do that and mess them up. But I can't change that. So here is my contact information, and I'm going to move some things so I can read better. I have 3 screens and I don't get to control where things pop up. So, Becky, what do you? Oh, and we have our good friend, the enrolled agent, sharing that new now per IRS primary taxpayer can get an IP pin, and it will go through if someone else already claimed the child. So
I'm sorry, Josh, I missed. Did you ask me something?
if there are questions that you saw, regular questions that I should address.
Yeah, they're still coming through in the chat, so you should be able to see um what's there. Let's see. There's a question about medical subsidy, and there was also a question about re pro future adoption subsidy.
Okay, so future needs would be Iowa, and for them, that is the $0, but you likely have the Medicaid card and may have gotten reimbursement. I believe that is proof that Iowa determined the child has special needs, and that you get to qualify for the full amount. Um, And for the medical subsidy, I need a little bit more information on what that means. I know. I'm trying to think who has medical subsidy.
There's a question
Oh,
about um oh sorry, were you
yep.
still?
So is that like you have a no monthly stipend at all, or like a DOC from Oklahoma um, for that medical subsidy? Like there's the basic, whether it's basic or you have a DOC on top of the basic, that monthly payment plus the sooner care and any reimbursement would qualify. Um, so what are you going to say, Becky? The sooner care in an adoption assistance agreement would be enough.
Okay.
Yep.
There's a question about a child's social security number changing that they claimed them as when they were a foster child with a previous social security number, and now it changed post-adoption, and
If
which they should use.
if it's been changed and you have the new numbers from the Social Security Administration, that's what you use. Name and numbers on the whatever the new documentation from Social Security Administration is.
There's a question, I don't know how this would be, but do you still file for adoption tax credit even though you can't claim them as a dependent?
Yes, you can claim the adoption credit even if you can't claim the child as a dependent. There is not a link there. I had a case probably 15 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, where the adoptive mom was disabled. Her adult kids helped out, claimed their child as a dependent, but and it was when the adoption tax rate was fully refundable, so she was able to benefit because otherwise she wasn't filing taxes. But there was not a connection requirement for being able to claim the child as a dependent to qualify for that. Oh, for amending 2024, I would use your the new numbers, even though they're different than what you had already filed on 2024, unless Becky Wilmoth says otherwise. But that's my answer. And and Becky Wilmoth is the enrolled agent who I've known for probably a good decade or so. Um, let's see. I did see one that I do want to address. Do private grants count against the credit amount? I do believe they do. So if you're getting reimbursed, like GoFundMe or private grants, like gift of adoption or something, that will count against your qualified adoption expenses.
And
And
Josh,
then,
what if you receive, maybe this wouldn't even be a case, but can you receive a grant, but then also receive adoption subsidy, and then you don't need adoption related expenses?
yeah, so if let's say I worked with the Down Syndrome, National Down Syndrome Association, was matched with a child out of that Cincinnati office, and I'm doing fundraising and they're covering my expenses, but the child, we got SSI, I was able to get adoption subsidy for that child and I adopted, then the subsidy will let you top off, and I don't, the QAE, the qualified adoption expenses don't matter at that point, whether I paid them and they got reimbursed or not. I think that's what you were asking.
Okay.
Yep, if you adopted in 2023, you do need to amend your 2023 and 24 and taxes and do those first.
And Josh, will you speak to whether or not you report adoption subsidy as income?
Subsidy is not income. For Lisa, if you finalize in 2023, I mean, if you don't use up all the credit in 2023, then you're gonna have leftover in 2024, and you want to use it then. And then if you have leftover before you do your 2025, you want to know how much to carry forward this year. If you use it all up in 2023, then yes, you wouldn't amend 2024.
Okay.
And for Jenny's questions, do you need to show that you spend more on the foster child than the monthly foster care payment not to claim the child tax credit? The child can't provide more than half their support. The old test you would have, not the current one. The old test being that you had to provide more than half the support, which exists for the qualifying relative, not qualifying child. Um, and yeah, I don't know that you would need to keep record of your monthly expenses on that.
And is SSI considered income?
That's a great question. For children, I don't generally think it is, but I'd have to look that up. Generally, and I don't think survivors benefits generally are, but I'd have to look that up. But you can reach out to me on that.
Okay. And that looks like everything.
So for Ryan's question, who finalized in 2022 and 23, the maximum you are getting is based on the year you finalized. You could get that difference in a later year if you had expenses in a later year. If it's from foster care, the easiest example, I know you said domestic, but international adoption, if I was in a state which required me to readopt and I paid a lawyer, like I finalized in 2025, but in 2026 I I did a readoption, I could get that difference from year one to year two. But once you finalize, unless you're doing more QAE later, you're sort of finished. You've finished where your cap is. Um, For Justin, you who's asking for expenses? You just put in the full amount and mark it as special needs if you get adoption subsidy. Yeah. Lisa, if you finalize in 2023 and you get adoption subsidy, you're going to amend your 2023 taxes. I think it was 15,890. I can't remember. All the numbers are blending right now. It's on the form, it's on the things, and you can reach out to me. It is on our webpage too. Um, yeah. All right, I'm gonna close my screen and I can actually answer that question. I just have to find. Let's see. And hopefully everybody got very clearly that you can reach out to me directly with questions. And it may take some time because I think we capped out, the highest I saw was 180 people. So there may be a 100 questions coming my way, but I'll work through them. And I like helping people. So
Yes, we will pull these questions and um, respond to the ones that we
need
may have
follow up.
missed because they're
Yeah.
coming through pretty fast. So, all right. Well, thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you for all your help. I saw the questions coming through. Thank God you were there to answer them. And thank you also to Becky Wilmoth, who I do an annual interview with creating a family podcast. If you're more of a podcast person, she covers some things that I don't cover and know well, like the SAVE Act and being able to take some money out of retirement to help with costs. She knows that better, and that information is on the Creating a Family podcast. I think it just dropped last week or this week. But go through that. She's in there. You'll hear my voice again. But we have our areas of expertise. You can think of us as like wonder twins to help adoptive families. So
Great. Well, thank you all. And we'll be sending the recording out. And thank you, Josh. And thank you,
thank
Becky
you.
Wilmoth.